Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right into what has to be one of the most complex, shocking, and honestly misunderstood cases in recent true crime history. Today, we're strictly analyzing the established facts, the psychological realities, and the documented evidence surrounding the life and actions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. There's a whole lot to unpack here, so let's get right into it. Let's just dive right into this bizarre story by starting with the inciting incident. June 14th, 2015. This exact chilling post pops up on the Facebook page of Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard. Right after, another message goes up implying her daughter, Gypsy Rose, had been brutally harmed. Naturally, friends and neighbors absolutely panicked. They called the cops, rushing them to Dee Dee's pink, wheelchair-accessible house in Springfield, Missouri. To everyone who knew them, this wasn't just a weird post on the internet. It was a literal life-or-death emergency for a helpless girl. Which brings us to Section 1, the shocking discovery. So police show up at the Springfield house, and what they find is a nightmare. Dee Dee Blanchard is dead inside. But Gypsy Rose, she's completely gone. Her wheelchair was just left sitting there in the house. This kicks off a massive, frantic search. You gotta remember, the entire community thought Gypsy was a terminally ill kid dealing with a horrific mix of leukemia, muscular dystrophy, and severe epilepsy. Everyone believed she was totally wheelchair-bound and completely physically helpless, so the immediate terrifying thought was, oh no, this highly vulnerable sick girl has been abducted and she's not going to survive without her round-the-clock medical care. But then, just days later, investigators tracked the IP address from those disturbing Facebook posts all the way to a house in Wisconsin. And when local authorities walked through those doors, they made a discovery that flipped the whole case completely upside down. Gypsy Rose was not only alive, she was perfectly healthy. The vulnerable, sick girl everyone was frantically searching for was walking around entirely under her own power. The devastating illnesses that made up her entire public identity, they literally didn't exist. Let's move to Section 2, Decades of Deception. The contrast here is just jarring when you really look at the facts. On one hand, you have the public image Dee Dee meticulously crafted, a helpless child. She used this to get charity, free trips, housing, and just a massive amount of community sympathy. I mean, she regularly shaved Gypsy's head to make it look like she was going through chemo and forced her to use that wheelchair. But then, on the other hand, you have the private reality. Behind closed doors, Gypsy was physically healthy. She was fully capable of walking. Dee Dee kept her entirely dependent through extreme coercive control, absolute isolation, and deliberate massive lies. She even went as far as hiding Gypsy's true age and birth certificate from her. It was just unimaginable control. So what's the crucial missing puzzle piece here? It's something called medical child abuse, which used to be known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. This explains exactly how Dee Dee pulled off this massive fraud for so long. She would constantly move and bounce around different doctors across Louisiana and Missouri. By doing this, she created this completely fragmented trail of medical records. No single doctor ever had the full picture. It's how she managed to subject Gypsy to decades of totally unnecessary surgeries, incredibly harsh medications, and even surgically putting in a feeding tube she never actually needed. And it all seemingly stemmed from a caregiver's deep, deep need for attention, sympathy, and total control. All right, on to Section 3, the secret digital escape. As Gypsy got older, she started to figure it out. She realized her actual physical capabilities didn't match up at all with her mother's dire diagnoses. And in that realization, she found a lifeline, the internet. Think about it. For someone who was never allowed to speak for herself at the doctor's office, someone who was totally barred from having any independent social life, the internet provided something she had quite literally never experienced before: absolute privacy. By secretly making these online profiles, Gypsy discovered this huge world completely outside her mom's strict bubble. For the very first time, she could present herself not as a dying patient, but just as a normal young woman with her own voice. And this hidden life escalated fast. Let's look at the timeline. In 2012, through these secret online profiles, Gypsy met a guy in Wisconsin named Nicholas Gojon. What started as just an emotional online relationship intensified really quickly. Later that year, they actually managed to secretly cross paths in person at a Springfield movie theater. But Dee Dee caught on, and she immediately cracked down hard. Gypsy reported that her computer was physically destroyed and she was tied to her bed as punishment. So by early 2015, after multiple failed attempts to just run away normally, this secret relationship shifted. It went from a distant fantasy of escaping into a desperate, tragically violent plot. Which brings us to Section 4, the breaking point. Now, what's really interesting here is that when this whole thing finally went to court, trauma specialists brought up the specific psychological concept to explain Gypsy's state of mind: learned helplessness. Basically, after years of total isolation, intense medical manipulation, and failed escape attempts that ended in severe physical punishment, a person becomes conditioned to believe there is literally no safe way out. The reality just shrinks. So from a psychological standpoint, this deeply ingrained conditioning helps explain why Gypsy felt that a violent crime was her only actual ticket to freedom. All of this online planning culminated on the night of June 9th, 2015. Nicholas Gogin took a bus all the way from Wisconsin down to Missouri. While Gypsy hid in the house, Nicholas physically committed the homicide, taking Dee Dee's life. This is the exact somber moment where a fantasy of escape turned into an irreversible, fatal reality. Afterward, the two of them fled back to Wisconsin together, thinking they could finally just start a new life. But before they took off, they posted those infamous, disturbing Facebook messages, specifically because they wanted someone to eventually find Dee Dee's body. Section 5. Victim or perpetrator. After their swift arrest in Wisconsin, the justice system was handed a totally unprecedented dilemma. The courts had to impartially weigh two incredibly conflicting realities. On one hand, you've got clear, documented evidence of trauma bonding. This is a well-established psychological phenomenon where Gypsy had this complex, terrified, but undeniably loving attachment to her abuser. She was definitively the victim of severe medical child abuse. But on the other hand, investigators uncovered an extensive digital footprint. We're talking text messages, travel arrangements, financial transactions. This evidence clearly proved there were months of conscious planning and premeditation directly leading up to the homicide. These two conflicting realities led to incredibly different legal outcomes for the defendants. Recognizing the extraordinary nature of the abuse Gypsy went through, prosecutors actually offered her a plea agreement. Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and got a 10-year sentence, an outcome that directly acknowledged her lifelong trauma. Nicholas Gogin, however, rejected a plea deal. He took it to a jury trial where his defense, which relied on his autism and emotional dependence on Gypsy, was ultimately rejected. Because the digital evidence so clearly proved conscious planning on his end, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Finally, Section 6. Life after the illusion. After serving exactly 85% of her 10-year sentence, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was officially granted parole. On December 28, 2023, she walked out of the Chillicothe Correctional Center. And you have to realize, for the first time in her conscious memory, she was stepping into a totally foreign world. Suddenly, she had to make her own independent adult choices, entirely without the suffocating control of her mother, and without the rigid, heavily structured schedule of a prison. Her release instantly turned her into a massive global internet celebrity, racking up millions of followers practically overnight. She quickly published a memoir about her incredibly unique experiences, and right away, her personal life started unfolding in the public eye. We've seen her navigate a marriage to Ryan Scott Anderson, their subsequent separation, reuniting with her former fiancé Ken Urker, and recently the massive announcement of a pregnancy. But throughout all of this overwhelming media frenzy and the weird complexities of modern true crime culture, she's publicly stated her primary goal. She wants to use her massive platform to advocate for other victims of medical child abuse, hoping she can help medical professionals spot the subtle warning signs early on. So, we leave you with this final provocative thought. How exactly should the justice system balance accountability for a crime with compassion for a lifetime of severe abuse? When a lifetime of medical child abuse ultimately ends in tragedy, where is the line between victimhood and criminal responsibility? It's a deeply complex question with absolutely no easy answers, and it's one that guarantees this case will be debated by legal scholars, psychologists, and all of us for years to come. Thanks for hanging out with us for this explainer.